today. So we have Dr. Dennis Hancock with us. Dennis was selected as the Early Career Award Alumni Award winner through the Graduate Student Association this year. So every year, the Grad Student Association selects a alumni that I believe is between 5 and 15 years graduated based on their achievements and what they've done. We select them as the Alumni Award winner. So this year we settled on Dennis. We voted and selected Dennis. So Dennis is the center director for the USDA ARS U.S. Dairy Forage Research Center in Madison, Wisconsin. The center's vision is to lead the world in integrated dairy forage systems research. The center is the site of multidisciplinary efforts involving engineers, microbiologists, chemists, and soil, plant, and animal scientists. And their common goal is to increase the efficiency of forage production and utilization in dairy diets while reducing the impact on the environment. Dennis grew up on a 100-acre cow calf operation in Western Kentucky, where his father also ran a gravel, lime, and fertilizer spreading business. He earned his bachelor's in agriculture in 1997 from Berea College. He earned his master's in plant and soil science in 1999 at the University of Kentucky. And after 2.5 year stint as a county extension agent in Northern Kentucky and Grant County, he returned to UK to work on his PhD part-time while he worked full-time as the research and extension coordinator for the University of Kentucky's Precision Ag team. He completed his PhD in crop science in 2006, and he's also served as a professor in the crop and soil science department at the University of Georgia, and was the state forage extension specialist from 2006 to 2020. So with that, I'm happy to introduce Dennis, and you feel free to share your screen, and the
Okay.
floor is all yours.
Well, thank you all very much for the award and for the invitation to be here today. This is uh, quite a quite a journey that I've been on, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about how impactful and important the University of Kentucky and the Plant and Soil Sciences Department there has played a role in my career arc. I titled this There and Back Again, kind of a talk about my journey through the world of forage and livestock systems. Um, I hope that you will find this. It's not extremely heavy on science. It'll be a bit more of my journey, but we'll go ahead and get started here. Let me make sure do you all see my screen with the image of everyone else, or just the screen?
Yeah, it looks. We can see the main slide. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I just wanted to make sure that everyone's picture wasn't actually showing up as well. Um, so I titled this "There and Back Again," not necessarily because I identify as a hobbit, although I share a lot of common characteristics with hobbits. A lot of you know like mid-morning snacks and that sort of thing. Um, and this is not a enhanced image. This is actually a photo from Hobbiton in New Zealand, one of the many treks I've been able to take. And I'll talk a little bit about my time in New Zealand a little bit um, as we go through. But really have enjoyed the opportunity to go on adventures. To be able to leave my little corner of Western Kentucky and be able to expand my horizons and travel and see a lot of the world. So over the next few minutes, I'd like to share with you a little bit of my background and how I came to the University of Kentucky and what I did while I was there during graduate school, share some of my mile markers of my career, both as an extension agent and my time with the UK Precision Ag team, and then my time at the University of Georgia as an extension forage agronomist and faculty member there. And then finally, I'll give you an update on where I am currently, what we do at the Dairy Forage Research Center, and how happy I am to be where I am with the team that we have assembled at the Dairy Forage Research Center. So, as many of you might know, I grew up in Kentucky, a little place called Dawson Springs, or really uh, the bustling metropolis that is Dawson Springs. It doesn't even show up on this map. Actually, I live in a suburb, came from a suburb of that called Fiddlebow, a little tiny community. Uh, I When I was growing up, it was just a gravel road. Now it's paved. you know, so very much a country boy from the sticks, and really had an opportunity to early on get bit by the bug of agriculture. I fell in love with farm life. Here I am on Bob. Bob is one of our cows that you can't hardly tell from the graininess of this photo, but Bob had a bob tail. That's why she was called Bob. Um, but grew up on a cow calf operation there with our backyard was our front pasture, and being able to grow up on that farm environment really is a great blessing. Um, as was mentioned in the bio, in addition to the cow calf farm that I grew up on, which between our parents' farm and my grandparents' farm, it was about 120 acres in total. My uncles also had a corn, soybean, tobacco, and wheat enterprises that I was heavily involved with. And then we had a lime and fertilizer spreading business that I was heavily involved in. All of this was kind of mixed in with many of my family members were involved in the coal industry at that time. So my grandfather was a coal miner. He was the one that set charges in the coal mines and was a specialist in explosives. My father actually produced mine pins, which held the roof together of coal mines. And for me, my choice was either go to college or go to the coal mines. Those were the two choices. Well, you can see that I made a better choice, I think. That coal mining is a hard life. But one of the things that really was and that really enabled me to be able to take on that direction was my time with 4-H initially, and then ultimately with FFA. So really got bit by the bug of agriculture in latter part of middle school and high school, and that really was fed by my high school ag teacher, Dwayne Vinson, and he really was probably one of the most important figures in my career arc. He really encouraged me to pursue agriculture as a field of as a career, and was enabled me to go on to college. And happened that I was able to go to a little place called Berea College. And Berea College is, as most of you know, or many of you know, is a small college in Eastern Kentucky that actually has an ag program. Even though it's a liberal arts college, it does have an ag program there. And at Berea is really for lower income folks, those of us who really didn't have the means to be able to pay, a significant amount of money for tuition and that sort of thing. And it's a work study location as well. So basically, you work your way through college, a minimum of 10 hours. By the end, you can work up to 20 hours per week. And back in those days, I think I was paid at max. It was $1.65 an hour or something like that. Wasn't very much more than pocket change, but they paid for tuition. And so whenever I graduated from Berea, I was basically graduated debt free, which is still something of great importance. But there is where I met Dr. Claude Gentry. And Claude was a soil scientist in the college. He taught many courses there, but he also took great pains to try to link the students up with internships. And Claude had a former student named Monroe Resnick, who was a longtime forage or an agronomist in general, a soil scientist and agronomist at Princeton, who had been working a lot with forages over the years. And Claude recognized that where I grew up was only about 35, 40 minutes away from the station there in Princeton. So he connected with Monroe. And Monroe said, I don't really have enough money to be able to pay for a summer internship the whole summer. Maybe I can get together with someone else and we can make this work. And so fortunately, he was able to do so, and he connected with Dr. Gary Lacefield. Now, for those of you that don't know Gary, and I'm glad that Gary was able to join us today, but if you don't know Gary, you've missed a treat, because he is one of the most infectious personalities I've ever come across. He is a passionate advocate for agriculture. Also, by the way, if you've ever heard him talk about America and his love of this country, I encourage you to do it. It's definitely inspirational. But between Monroe and Gary, I've just got a great foundation, a great start to this career. Because prior to that, I really didn't understand that one could make a career out of conducting agricultural research. I knew our extension agent, but that's about as far as it went as far as agricultural education. So I was able to kind of channel my passion for forage, cows, environment, and farm families into some work that was really of benefit to the society. And one of the things that Monroe taught me early on, when we were just kind of in going around to various places. And I remember one day that we were on our way back from Muhlenberg County and visiting the county agent there, or Daryl Simpson, I believe. And if I don't recall incorrectly, I believe that Daryl had only been there for a few years at this point. We came back from identifying some seed that was maybe supposed to be orchard grass and ended up being tall fescue or something like that. But anyway, one of the things that Monroe talked about is that he said, you have to establish some rapport with the people that you're working with. And he said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I didn't know at the time that was a Teddy Roosevelt quote, and I think it's very apropos. But Gary was also one that just really inspired me too, and going to many extension events with Gary and hearing him talk and trying to convince producers to adopt new practices, etc. And I come to find out also, of course, that Gary was one of the co-authors of the Southern Forages textbook. And at the end of my internship there, Gary, at this time it was just the first edition. Now they're up to the fifth edition of the Southern Forages book. But he had a copy of the first edition that was signed by all three of those authors, himself and Dr. Ball and Dr. Hovland. And at the end of that, that made such an impression on me as a kid from the sticks of Western Kentucky. I'd never known anybody that read a book before. You know, an author, a real bona fide published author. That was kind of cool for me. And so that made an impression on me. And I kind of made a resolution that after all this was said and done, my training was all said and done, I wanted to end up at one of those three locations: Auburn University, where Don Ball was at; University of Georgia, where Carl Hovland was at; or University of Kentucky, where Gary Lacefield was at. And I said, that really is the career arc that I want to take. And I was fortunate to be able to fulfill that goal by going to the University of Georgia. Well, the following summer, I was able to do an internship with Dr. Mike Collins. And Mike was heavily engaged at that time in doing work out at Spindletop. And he was doing specifically a lot of work with hay and baleage. Baleage was brand new at this point. This was something that was very new to the States, although it had been in Europe for a few years prior to that. But in the US, there hadn't been very much work done on those old marshmallow bales, as we would call them, the baleage bales. And so my master's research was focusing later, and after all this was said and done, I was able to do a master's project with Mike, looking at the amount of bale wrap that it would take to successfully ensile forage crops like alfalfa, which is the principal one we were dealing with. And now I wanted to take a moment here and just say a word, especially for our graduate students that are here today. Um, I had pretty good grades when I was an undergrad, and I did okay on the GRE score, but I missed the GRE cutoff for the departmental assistantship by 10 points. And I was so disappointed in myself, and Mike actually had been lobbying really, really hard to try to get a departmental assistantship for me. And um, I got turned down. The department didn't give me an assistantship that first year. And the department head at the time, or department chair there at UK at the time, was saying, you know, if you can, to Mike, if you can put him on as a student worker and pay him an hourly wage that would be somewhat equivalent to what he would be making as a graduate student. If after that first semester he makes straight A's, we'll put him on to an assistantship. Well, that was just enough to make me mad. and I was bound and determined that come heck or high water, I was going to make straight A's. And at the end of that first semester, I went into the stats final. It was a 150-point score is what the total test point uh, possibility was. And as long as I got 138 or something like that out of 150, I was going to get straight A's. And so I came back and I got 144 out of 150, had straight A's, and I had a little bit of a celebration. Well, fast forward a little bit until the end of my PhD career. And I'm not just saying this to brag, I'm saying it to tell you to use these sorts of things to motivate you. By the time I finished my PhD, I'd had a 4.0 straight through. And by that time, the department head was now the dean. And the dean, of course, participates in or at least did then, participates in the hooding ceremony for the PhD students. And so when I walked across the stage and Scott Smith was standing there, and I said, you know, you remember you didn't want to give me an assistantship, right? He said, yeah. I said, you know, I got 4.0 all the way through graduate school. He said, yeah, I know. I've been paying attention. I've been watching. So, you know, for me, it was a motivation, and I encourage you to think of setbacks sometimes as you go through your career as motivation for something greater. One of the things that did occur while I was working on my master's there is that they set out to do some extension activities with Bailage. This was so new that they wanted to do some demonstrations of it. So Mike actually ultimately put me on a 3/4 time assistantship, which is kind of rare for that time. He put me on at 3/4 time, and the extra quarter of time meant that he wanted me to do some extension activities with it. So we ended up setting up a lot of demonstrations across the state. I had a truck and a trailer, and I would load up the baler and the wrapper, and we would go here and yonder, uh, setting up these field days and doing some prep work in advance of those field days. And I forget now how many of those we ended up doing, but it was a good number. Just had a blast doing it. Really enjoyed that, and that again got me bit by the extension bug. One of the side effects of that was that we were able to have substantial impact that we were able to document along the way of how many folks had actually started utilizing baled silage as a result of some of those early extension efforts. And it's led to more extension activities. I became a county extension agent in Grant County up in northern Kentucky. Started January 1st, 2000. So it's always been easy for me to keep track of when my extension career officially started. Um, and I was there until June of 2002. But when I was there, was in the midst of the tobacco buyout efforts and the transition of tobacco from really small, you know, less than 5 acres a lot of times, um, uh, for the allotment of tobacco growth. And at that time, Grant County was principally beef cattle and tobacco. That was the primary focus there. One of the things that we did was we engaged immediately in some extension programs on baleage and trying to transition to other things like seasonal high tunnels and growing vegetable crops and other types of things to replace the tobacco income for those smaller landholders. But in June of 2002, I was wooed back to campus. There was a precision ag team there at the time that really needed some a master's level person to kind of coordinate all of the research and extension activities that were going on as part of the precision ag effort at that time. So I was able to come back to campus on the condition that I be given an opportunity to work on my PhD part time, and they agreed to that and allowed me to pursue my PhD. My official supervisor there was Scott Shear. Scott was a long-time faculty member in the Biosystems and Ag Engineering department there, and he's now the department chair up at the Ohio State University. Scott was a great mentor to me, and really, that particular position was more like a postdoc position than anything else. It was a great opportunity to learn about the system and how to be a successful faculty member. And one of the things that Scott taught me very early on, I remember one day he said, all science is politics. And when he first said it, I really didn't understand it all that well. But as I've progressed through my career as a faculty member, and especially now in ARS, boy, science sure is a lot of politics. There's a lot that goes into that. But as I was working full time for Scott, I was working on my PhD part time from 2003 to 2006 with Mike Collins. And actually, during that time, Mike departed for a department chair position down at Mississippi State. And Chuck Doherty, who was already kind of co-advising me on my PhD, took over the full advisorship for my PhD program, and really ably led me through that effort, and really was glad to have the opportunity to learn from both of these very esteemed forage workers, uh, brilliant men in each of their own rights. But what I was charged with looking at was subsurface drip irrigation on alfalfa. Subsurface drip tape is installed under the soil surface about 18 inches or so below the ground. And you can kind of see some of the installation going on here. And then once you've used a shank to get it into the ground, then you cut across the ends of it and run header lines to connect all of those lines together so that it equalizes the pressure across all those tapes. And so we established an experiment to do that, and that was basically the whole plot treatment. In that we had some subplot treatments where we were looking at potassium nutrition of alfalfa and trying to look at the impacts of potassium nutrition on alfalfa physiology and how that responded to it. We also layered in some work on multispectral reflectance of alfalfa yield. So could we use that to predict alfalfa yield? And so we had a couple of different technologies that are out there at the time, and we had constructed this little buggy to go through the field to measure the crop and to assess the canopy. And we're able to successfully relate it. And I'll show you some of that data in a moment. So out of that research, we found that we were able to increase the yield of alfalfa with subsurface drip irrigation. Turns out we could do it fairly cost effectively. Um, and of course, one of the challenges with doing any kind of irrigation research is inevitably when you start irrigation research, you'll start getting good rainfall. So 2 of the 3 years we had pretty decent rainfall. The third year was a bit drier, and we had a better response. But overall, this is the result that we saw both with the subsurface drip irrigation and the potassium fertility. You can see the curvilinear response that we got here. And as we increase potassium, of course, we'll see some increase in yield as long as potassium is limiting in the soil. And we saw a moisture response there too. So that was good finding. We also looked at leaf area. We looked at stem count, leaf count. We spent a lot of hours stripping leaves off plants. Well, one of the things that paid off dividends when we were looking at the spectral reflectance and relating that back to various crop parameters, and one of those was looking at yield. And you can see here with the NIR, the near infrared section of the spectrum, you can see some pretty substantial increases in the reflectance in those wavelengths as yield increases. And we were able to look at some vegetation indices. We started with the regular normalized difference vegetation indices and compared that to yield. and it saturates. Once you get above about 1.5 tons of yield to the acre, um, or excuse me, 1.5 megagrams per hectare, we would start saturating, and we couldn't tell much of a difference above that. We refined some of those metrics, and we went to the wide dynamic range vegetation index, and was able to extend that a little bit further to identify some of the weak zones in a pasture. Whoop. And if we look at a yield map here, you can kind of see this is one out at the Animal Research Center out in Versailles, and you can see actually two sinkholes in this particular field show up very readily in that yield map. So I was fortunate from that time to actually win a few awards from the Potash and Phosphate Institute at that time, and really was glad to be able to make some connections there. That actually paid some dividends once I became a faculty member. I was able to leverage that for some research dollars as well. So from there, I went to the University of Georgia from 2006 until January of last year. I was the forage extension specialist at the University of Georgia. For almost that entire time, I was the only forage specialist. In Kentucky, you all are lucky that you've got really three good ones, and then plus you've got several other forage researchers that work there too. So, but in Georgia, I was kind of the one man show there for a long time. And then subsequently, when Jennifer Tucker came on board later, and then toward the end, Lisa Baxter came in Tifton to do some additional work. Um, Really, it was a great time. That entire part of my career, I really enjoyed. From that time, spent a lot of time responding to drought. We had a major drought when I first got there. That we had a major extension effort in response to that. In those early days, especially, we were dealing with extremely high fertilizer prices. So we were developing strategies and changing our nitrogen fertilizer sources, and educating folks about the potassium deficiency issues in Bermuda grass and stand loss. Um, Worked on the economics of baled silage, wrote a couple articles about the economics of baled silage and how to make that technology pay off. And spent a lot of time and effort doing winter and summer annual grazing research. Had several winter annual projects, and now several summer annual projects. In fact, the last one of those is finishing up in a couple weeks with a PhD student who is getting ready to defend. Um, so we had a number of publications that came out of that, and really better understanding animal performance on some of these summer annual forages. One of the key things that defined my career at UGA was the arrival of the Bermuda grass stem maggot, which was an invasive pest species from Southeast Asia that was, prior to that, is really unknown in the US, and it became a major problem starting in about 2010. And the whole world's knowledge about that particular insect would have been summarized in one page prior to a lot of the work. And Lisa Baxter, who is now a faculty member there, um, at that time, she was a master's student with me, and she really started that ball rolling later as a postdoc, and then as a faculty member working on that particular subject. But one of the things I really became known about is my work with pasture-based dairies there in Georgia. In Georgia, because of irrigated pastures, they were able to stock very heavily, greater than about 2 cows to the acre. And in some cases, it might be as many as 5 cows to the acre, if depending on how they were supplementing it. And there were a lot of questions about environmental issues and the concept of putting those cows out on grass in South Georgia, et cetera. There were a lot of questions and very few answers. So we tried to work to answer some of those, particularly as it relates to the environmental issues. But during that time, now let me be clear, I'm not taking credit for this increase in the number of pasture-based dairy cows. I did my part to assist in that. There are a lot of factors that went into play here, but from 2006, when I came to Georgia, until 2015, when this data is showing here, we had drastically increased. We got to a point that about 25% of the of the dairy herd in Georgia were pasture-based dairy cows. So a great expansion was going on at that time, and we were actively doing grazing schools and grazing trainings to support that expansion. We also did a lot of research. This is one of our graduate students who did some of that work, looking at various environmental aspects. And what we found was that nitrate leaching was slightly less on those pastures compared to confinement systems. Nitrous oxide emissions actually were quite similar. Ammonia volatilization loss and phosphorus runoff was greater on the confinement system than pasture, but there were higher methane emissions on pasture. So the summary of that was a carbon footprint that actually ended up being a break even basically between the two. Approximately, it was the same per unit of milk that was produced, whether it was from pasture or from confinement means. But I would have to say and point out that the confinement dairy that we used in this case study was an early adopter of conservation tillage and some of the many practices that we recommend. And the pasture-based dairy that we were dealing with at the time was a fairly new dairy at that time. It was less than 3 years old during the time of data collection. And what we subsequently found is that on those pasture-based dairies, we were seeing dramatic increases in organic matter. And when I say dramatic, I'm saying we saw the increase of organic matter on those soils by a third of a percentage point every year for the first several years that we were working with them. And this particular study was, there was no credit actually given for soil carbon sequestration. So I'd like to revisit that at some point, because what we found was that as those dairies were converted from row crops over into pasture-based dairies, they first went into a lag phase where organic carbon in the soil really didn't change that much, but it went into a carbon accumulation stage where we were seeing a pretty rapid increase. And this was this phase in which we were seeing a third of a percentage point each year. In this case, this is the top 30 centimeters, but we were seeing that in the top 4 inches or so. Pretty dramatic. This was published in one of the Nature magazines, Nature Communications. Really pleased with the outcome of that work. Now, that work led to some connections in New Zealand. So in 2010, I began a relationship with some folks in New Zealand and several companies in New Zealand, and ultimately ended up spending quite a bit of time in New Zealand, traveling around. Got a chance to visit a lot of the pasture-based areas there in New Zealand and learning a lot as to how they manage pastures. Ultimately ended up taking two different tour groups over to New Zealand, one in 2013 and one for the American Foraging Grassland Council in 2016. This is a look of the group here right in front of Bilbo Baggins's Hobbit Hole at Hobbiton in the North Island of New Zealand. So really had a great opportunity to go around the world and explore different forage systems in New Zealand, Australia, Costa Rica, many other places there, seeing how others were getting the most out of their pasture. Another endeavor that I was engaged in while at UGA was the conversion of the plant sciences farm to a new farm. So imagine, if you will, the dean comes into a faculty meeting and says, okay, sorry, but we're going to sell Spindletop. You can't have an agronomy farm out there anymore. So what are we going to do about it? Well, they're what they wanted to do is not do anything. They didn't really want to build a new barn, a new research farm for us. We had to get involved in some politics and try to make that happen, but ultimately we did, and we convinced them to be able to reinvest in a new facility, quite a bit further down the road, but a brand new facility called the Iron Horse Plant Sciences Research Farm. It's called the Iron Horse Farm after a sculpture that was actually on this farm originally. But that, as a little side story there, that sculpture actually started its life on the UGA campus. If you'd like to hear more about it, it's got quite a story of its own to tell. On their farm webpage, they actually have a narrative about where the origin story of that horse. But that Iron Horse is located in the middle of the Iron Horse Research Farm. This is a picture of the farm on both sides of the road here. So this is kind of more of the research area, and you can see some research area on the eastern side of the road here too. Um, this was taken a few months prior to the official opening. Um, One of the challenges that we encountered is that it had an open mine on it. They were mining sand, and we had to officially close the mine. So that ended up costing quite a bit of money. By the time it was all said and done, it was a $17 million project. I was the chair of this during this time, and I can tell you it was a chore for everyone involved, especially the farm crew. They really were the ones doing the lion's share of that work. But I got to oversee that and have my hand in designing buildings, et cetera. And I thought I was done with that until now at the center here, we're starting to build again. But I couldn't have done it then without the assistance of grad students and technicians who were able to keep our research program going, and a lot of key collaborators, folks like Lawton Stewart and Dory Franklin and Gary Hawkins and Kurt Lacey, who was an ag economist. I had great collaborators when I was at UGA to work on a lot of things, and we had a lot of students come through our program as a result of that. I was fortunate to win a number of awards from that, both at the college and from our county agents. By the way, I always like to point out this probably one of my favorite awards that I've gotten is the Junior Specialist Award and the Senior Extension Specialist Award. The county agents there, comically, they would give us a shovel, and they would say that's for the PhD, the piled higher and deeper, you know. So I'm very proud of that, having served as a county agent and representing our extension agents. So I was able to win a number of awards there, including the two that I'm most proud of as well from a national standpoint, the Merit Award from AFGC and the Medallion Award. Last year, I was fortunate enough to win that one. I treasure all of those awards. So in January of last year, I made the move though to the Dairy Forage Research Center. I was telling the grad students earlier, you know, if the athletic director of UK's basketball program calls you up and says, "How about you come coach for us at the University of Kentucky?" You'd be a fool to turn them down. And that's kind of how I viewed it as the Dairy Forage Research Center when Neil Martin, who was one of the former directors, reached out to me, and then subsequently Jeff Brink and a few others of the folks there contacted me about applying for the center director role at the Dairy Forage Research Center. I said, you know, I'm happy where I'm at, but I can't turn down an opportunity to interview for this position because this is the most preeminent position in our industry and the most impactful lab as a whole, in my opinion, to be able to address the dairy forage production cycle and all that goes into that. But I want to illustrate too that it's not just the Dairy Forage Research Center in a vacuum. Within ARS, we've got a number of locations that are working on common goals for dairy forages. One is the Plant Science Research Unit in St. Paul, Minnesota. Of course, you all know of the Forage Animal Production Research Unit there in Lexington. And then we also have the Pasture Systems Lab in University Park, Pennsylvania, just outside of Penn State. So lots of opportunities there for impactful research and common goals among our units. Our vision really is to lead the world in integrated dairy forage systems research. And I really want to place an emphasis here on this word integrated. Integrated meaning looking at all of these things together as they interact. It's in that interaction that is where the story really is told oftentimes. So to me, that really was one of the most important parts. And when I say integrated, we look at forage, nutrition, and the environment. Let me dig a little deeper into that so you can see some of the topics that we work on. We work on everything from soil health and soil fertility and nutrient management in general, all the way back around to forage breeding, forage physiology, uh, dairy nutrition, forage microbiology, rumen microbiology, and then also the environmental side of things, looking at emissions and contaminants that might be getting into the groundwater system. These are all interconnected. And so we're trying to develop a research program um, that is multidisciplinary. We don't have silos. Although we have three different research units at the center, these three research units are very interconnected. And each one of those research units has a dairy scientist as well as a maybe a soil scientist or a plant physiologist or um, someone who specializes in environmental science. Um, but those three units are organized basically as follows. The cell wall biology and utilization research unit is kind of to better understand dairy animal and forage physiology, so more basic types of science. The dairy forage research unit is oriented around improving dairy forage production and feeding systems, which is more of an applied science. And then you have the environmentally integrated dairy management research unit, which really focuses on reducing the environmental input footprint of the U.S. dairy forage industry. And so, from an environmental science perspective, all of these things then are kind of woven into the same center. In the cell wall unit, we have 8 scientists currently. In the dairy forage unit, we currently have 8, although we will, by the end of this fiscal year, grow to 10 scientists there. And then we have 5 in the environmentally integrated dairy management research unit, which is located in Marshfield, more central Wisconsin. In addition to all these scientists, then each scientist has a technician, and then some of them will also have another technician or a postdoc or a number of grad students. So all total within our center, right now we're having to report daily where everybody's at, so I know exactly. So we have 101 individuals that are in my charge there at the center, and have some great researchers and great research leaders to work with and lead our center as a team. Now, the center here really has a legacy of impactful research. If you're not familiar with the Dairy Forage Research Center, you probably have seen a lot of their work, maybe not recognized it from the Dairy Forage Research Center, because they've published over 2,500 publications over the years, and they're editors, authors, or co-authors in over 60 different books. This is a selection of some of those, some of which are used as textbooks, some of which are used to guide daily ration development on dairy farms, nutrient requirements of dairy cattle, some that are on the shelf that really provide a great resource for forage specialists or extension agents or educators around the country. This is just a selection. There are many, many more, of course. Many of these actually are listed on our website. If you're interested, you can check them out and link to them. If some of them you have to buy, some of them are available as PDFs, etc. One thing that I'm really proud of is our center's role in the NIRS revolution of forage quality analyses. They were really kind of at the epicenter, if you will, for the consortium, the NIRS consortium, and what later became the National Forage Testing Association and their standards for forage testing labs across the country. Our center's scientists and leadership has played a major leadership role over the years in forage analyses. If you're interested, back last September, I put together to celebrate our 40th anniversary as a center. I put together a little talk that I did for the World Dairy Expo, which, like everything else, was going virtual last year. So it's recorded and archived on this YouTube page. If you're interested, you can check it out. Without going into all the details here, I wanted to give you a sense of some of the topics and some of the people that we have working in our center. Some names that you probably are somewhat familiar with if you work in the area. Folks like John Grabber, for example, who's done a lot of work with the agronomy of alfalfa and corn silage systems. Mary Beth Hall, who's a dairy nutritionist. Mike Sullivan, who's a plant physiologist who looks at trying to protect the nitrogen and the protein of alfalfa and other crops. Wayne Koblentz, who was a real mentor to me in my master's degree, even or post-harvest physiology of hay and silage. So kind of the who's who of forage research, and we're adding positions right now. We have one that will be coming open on alfalfa-based dairy dieting, diet, nutrition, etc. One on alfalfa persistence and winter kill. So be looking for those position descriptions soon. Real hurriedly here, just I want to close with our next highest goal here is to focus on building a new research dairy. If you know much at all about livestock systems, you know that building a large animal facility within a stone's throw of a major river is probably not the best of ideas. But that wasn't really much on the radar screen in the late 1970s and 1980s when that our research dairy was built in Prairie du Sac. So we're actually looking to get it away from the river because of that contamination issue, but also for better ventilation for cow health, as well as logistics. If we can get closer to our crop base, right now everything has to across a major road, and that leads to a lot of labor inefficiencies, et cetera. Plus, this building is designed for 1980s cows and 1980 dairies, and a lot has changed in 40 years in the dairy industry, in particular, robotic milking. And our new research dairy will have a focus, an entire subunit that will be based on robotic milking systems and doing research there. The original dairy was sized to only be about 320 to 325 cows. They have had as many as 450 in there at a time. We're now running about 360 or so that we're milking currently, and our new goal is about 450 cows for our research purposes, plus an improved design for animal care and well-being. So I'm really excited about the prospect of that, and that's the next big challenge. You know, when I finished the agronomy farm at UGA, I swore that I would never ever be involved in another building project ever again. Well, let that be a lesson to all grad students. Never say never. That is definitely one way to assure that those things are going to occur. So that's been a little bit of my journey through my career. I hope I've allowed enough time here for us to have a few questions and comments.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. Yeah, we got probably 10 minutes for questions, so feel free to anybody can ask or put them in the chat or just shout them out as well.
Dennis, I wanted to jump in here. You've been involved in some pretty major things when you were down at the University of Georgia. And you were, like you said, a one-man band. So talk about the team building and the networking you had to do to get all those things done.
Yeah, that is absolutely a crucial point, Jimmy. And that occurred at all different levels, right? It occurred at the extension, on the extension side of things. We had a forage extension team of 9 to 10 extension agents were on our team. They were specially trained to help extend our reach for our forage extension effort. And so that was really crucial on the extension side, but on the research side, and to some degree also on extension, is having key collaborators. When I first got to UGA, I had Kurt Lacey, who was an ag economist, Lawton Stewart, who was a beef cattle nutritionist, and the three of us really ended up being like the three amigos. We went everywhere together. We did extension meetings together. We did research collaborations together. I was telling the grad students earlier, you know, the keys to success, in my opinion, is finding good partners and good collaborators. You know, there are folks that can make it all on their own and their lab does everything and they're one-man band type of approach. But if you look at them, at a lot of those folks, they tend to be very successful and professional sometime, but maybe not all that successful as real people. You know, they can be they kind of lose their touch with everything else. To me, I always found great success and great synergism by working with people that had similar goals, that really were after the same things that I was after, and we found that, instead of me writing an article and them writing an article, that instead of having 3, we ended up with 10. Just because you had this synergistic effect that came out of those collaborative efforts. We could co-fund technicians or co-fund postdocs and graduate students, where you may not be able to cobble together enough of that money on your own to be able to do that. So it wasn't just me by any stretch. There was a lot of folks that were part of that team, and it really was a team effort.
Dennis, there's a lot of changes in the dairy industry. I mean, mainly larger dairies, with the exception of a few of the smaller organic dairies. Is there a place for small to medium-sized dairies when you look at the U.S., just from your perspective and what you've seen up there?
Ray, that's a really hard question to answer. In my opinion, yes, there is. However, I think to really do that well, it's not going to necessarily be through the conventional dairy stream, right? I really believe that what is happening here in Wisconsin is a good example of that, because you have a lot of an emphasis on things like specialty cheeses or specialty products that are coming out of that. Much more of a connection to meeting a niche in the marketplace. Sometimes that niche may be as simple as your production practices and providing a product that is produced in a certain way that meets a customer's demand. To me, there's a role for all of those, right? I think there's a role for the 30,000 cow dairies that are out in the western states, for example. There's also a role for the 50 cow dairy in central Wisconsin. But I think that 50 cow dairy cannot fool themselves into thinking that they can continue to operate like grandfather did, and still market their milk in the same way. They're going to have to think outside the box and differently. And I've long advocated for the fact that we need to take a lesson from the wine industry. You look at the wine industry, you have all these different segments. You go into any store that sells wine, and there's tens of thousands of different variations on those stores. And each one of them will have their own kind of niche, their own label, their own terroir, that their own specific flavor or what have you. I think that we should strive for something similar in the dairy industry. One of the so-called grand challenges that ARS is engaged in right now is to try to link dairy production to the food science side. So we have, for example, Ken Kauscher in our center is one of a team in ARS where we're looking at the impacts of management, of agronomic management and so forth, and then management in the barn, and how that affects characteristics of the milk. Not necessarily quality, but characteristics, things that there may be certain compounds that are more concentrated, et cetera. So I see that as being a real opportunity, but it's going to take a substantial amount of investment, a risk. Those producers can't, rest on their laurels and just continue to market milk through their typical co-op. They're going to have to think outside the box to take advantage of it.
Thanks, Dennis.
Any other questions? No.
One here from Rebecca messaged me directly here. Looking back on your career, is there anything you would change? I was telling the grad students a little bit about this earlier, and I would say the thing that I would change is, well, let me just be honest. My name's Dennis and I'm a workaholic. Okay.
Hmm.
I am one who loves to be in the office, loves to be on the road all the time. And one can't do that forever though. One cannot approach life that way. Um, you can't be all things to all people. The one thing that I would change about my career is saying no more often and being more selective about things I said yes to. For the sake of my own career, for the sake of my own sanity, and the sake of my family. And a lot gets sacrificed at the altar of productivity and chasing goals, etc. And sometimes you got to be careful about what is the consequence of that. And I would just encourage everyone to think about, be more selective about what you say yes to.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I thank you again, Dennis. We do have, we'd rather have you here. We do have a plaque for you that we're pulling together and we'll send to you. We'd rather have you here and present that to you, but we do appreciate you taking time, especially the students today, and giving us advice. And, as we move forward in our careers, we appreciate it. So we all thank you for being here and taking your time and giving this seminar today.
My pleasure. I sincerely appreciate that award. It's a great honor, and I hope that I continue to make the department proud. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
And Dan, if it's okay for me to remind faculty that we'll be meeting with Dennis at 1, that was sent out as another email. So look forward to faculty coming on board and thinking up some really good discussion topics and questions for Dennis when we meet.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So thanks, Dennis. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.